Hello, everyone. My name's John Roller, and I'm one of the pastors here at Woven, and we want to welcome you. Just so happy that you're here today. So happy to have you join us. We have a lot of visitors today, and especially those of you that have come to see April and Tim, of course, but that follow New Evangelicals. Thank you for being a part of that and for being here today. We want to say out loud every Sunday that no matter what your race or ethnicity, no matter what your socioeconomic background is, no matter whether you are, whatever your sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression, no matter how people have thought of you, if they've thought of you as important or not important, no matter if you're tall or short, we're just so glad that you're here today. I'm going to start us even with a prayer. So, Holy Spirit, even this day we invite your presence, we invite you here. For those who believe in you and those who don't have any use for you, we welcome them and we invite you. You're never a party crasher. You are always present by consent. Help us to understand more of your heart this day. We believe it's always a heart of love. Will you help us to see that and understand it? And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Danny's going to lead us.
Hi, everyone. If you were here a couple of weeks ago when April spoke here, you are gonna recognize this song. It's a song that I wrote a long time ago, while I was very much in the middle of deconstructing my faith and reevaluating my relationship with God, with the Bible, all of those things. And as a lot of you can probably resonate, it's a very anxiety-inducing time. And the phrase, "be still," kept coming back. And even though I don't like the Bible anymore, that phrase, "be still," is still, very prevalent in my life. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us, especially this week, to, in the middle of all of the turmoil in our personal lives, in our brains, in our social lives, in the country as a whole, in the world as a whole, it's a good reminder to be still and just to take a breath. So I invite you, in whatever way you can, want to, are able to just, throughout this song, take a breath. Close your eyes, pay attention where you're holding tension in your body, and release it. So I hope this song, these lyrics wash over you. Be still, my broken heart, and be restored. For the love you think you've lost, you'll find once more. pain you're holding near one day will cease. Oh, I'll say be still, be still, be still, be still, be still. Be still, be still. Don't rush what you don't see. Be still, enjoy this peace. For tomorrow's now today. And yesterday was all the same. Don't rush what you don't see. Be still, enjoy this peace. For tomorrow's now today. And yesterday was all the same. Be still. Be still. Be still. Oh, be still. Be still. Be still. Be still. Be still, my broken heart, and be restored. For the love you think you've lost, you'll find once more.
Thank you, Daniel. You're wonderful. Before we move into the time of talking with Tim and April, I was wondering if a few of you could just humor me for a second. And a lot of us received some news this past week that puts us in a state of grief and hardship. So Black Liturgies kind of was a safe haven for me. So as I just want to do a little bit of a breathing exercise where as we inhale together, we think, I'm not foolish for hoping. And then as we exhale, it's, I won't rush from this grief. So let's just breathe in and breathe out for a second. So inhale, I'm not foolish for hoping. Exhale, I won't rush from this grief. Let's do it one more time. Inhale, I'm not foolish for hoping. And then exhale, I won't rush from this grief. Now is the most jarring thing in the world. We are actually genuinely excited to have April Joy and Tim Whitaker with us. Will you welcome them as they come up? Thank you both so much again for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's worked out nice.
Yeah.
Nicely.
That's a strong word.
Well, I meant like that we're all here in person.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not in my guest bedroom. I'll take the win.
Yeah. So just by way of starting, probably most people know about the new evangelicals, but some people may not. So why don't you just kind of start by telling us what it means to be a new evangelical in both of your respective opinions, because they might be different.
Yeah, well, the new evangelicals, I started it out of my attic in 2020 in December. I was just really kind of frustrated with the trajectory of my evangelical tradition for many reasons, and had this name like New Evangelicals. I like that, and went on Instagram and just made a video like, who knows what this will become, and it just kind of grew into this thing. So what we are legally is a nonprofit organization. We do three major things. We hold space for folks who have been marginalized by the evangelical church. We advocate for accountability inside of evangelical spaces. And we help people explore the Christian tradition beyond what I call is the basement of evangelical fundamentalism. So those are the three things that we primarily focus on. It's all digital. So it's not a church. There isn't like a meeting thing that happens, once a week. It's mostly me making content in my guest bedroom.
Nice.
That was the joke earlier, hoping that people are hearing this stuff. And then we have, of course, a board of directors, a few contractors. And then April joins me every Friday for like a weekly recap. So that's what we do.
Awesome. How about you, April?
Well, I'm a new evangelical. So I don't really consider myself evangelical, which I don't think Tim probably does either. We're trying to, it's like a redefinition of what that is. But to me, what I like about the new evangelicals is that it can get into places and reach the lost in evangelical churches where, if we were just like openly like progressive and, you know, like it couldn't as much. So.
Yeah, that's definitely true. People do ask, well, why new evangelical?
Right, yeah, I'm actually curious myself.
Right, I totally get that. And to be transparent, when I came up with the name, I still was pretty much embedded in like conservative spaces, although so much of my own views on everything was changing, right? So I was still attending a conservative, like Assemblies of God church. I was drumming in that church every Sunday. I loved it. It was really high production, but I had all these questions. So for me at the time, new evangelical was just kind of a way of saying, like, maybe there's a way to push some of this stuff forward. And I think 4 years into this experiment called the New Evangelicals, it's still kind of it's more of a both and for me at this point. I really don't think that white evangelicalism as it currently stands in its current form is salvageable. But the term evangelical is really malleable and throughout history has taken on different connotations. Some of the early Wesleyans were abolitionists, for example, and they were the first people to ordain women at Oberlin College. So there is, I think, a history of evangelicalism that's actually worth like really talking about. There have been all kinds of movements inside the evangelical American experiment of black evangelicals, queer evangelicals in the 60s and 70s trying to push things forward. They've just always been kind of shoved out. So I know that like this is an uphill battle, but I think that the name is still worth holding on to for a few reasons. And one of them is because there's a rich history of liberation, but also, and this might be kind of petty, but can I curse here?
Yeah, please.
I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
But I like letting bro evangelicals know that they don't own the term evangelical and that there's nothing they can do about it. Like they can't sue me, they can't stop me, they can't do anything about the fact that we say we are evangelical and fully affirming and committed to decolonization and want to think about the rights of all of our neighbors, and they just have to deal with it. So there is a part of me that likes the salt in the wound a little bit, like, cope. You can't do anything about this, and we're going to be very loud and proud about what we believe as these so-called new evangelicals.
I absolutely love that story, and I had no idea that was the real answer, so that's super cool.
Deep down,
Yeah. So what was it, though, as you called it white evangelicalism, what was it that kind of convinced you both to, like, leave? Like, what was kind of the final straw?
Well, he just won again.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was the final straw for me.
Wow.
Okay, is that it?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, I just gave most of my story like a couple weeks ago, so you go ahead.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, for me, it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, I think. Growing up, I was homeschooled, grew up in like for those of you who might know the name, not to trigger anyone, John MacArthur, very like conservative, very not good. But I grew up like in that kind of theological paradigm, very God has predestined you to be saved, election, American Calvinism, the kind of idea, tulip theology. And I was kind of sucked into like this evangelical vortex because that's all I knew, that's all my parents knew, and there's a whole subculture of evangelical everything for youth and for men like me to be wild at heart and to storm a castle. And is anyone here throwing up yet? You're all good, okay? But I'm just saying.
Yeah, you're saying some things that I'm like, ugh.
me too, but it's the truth, right? Like a lot of us are familiar with some of the language I'm throwing out there. So I grew up that way, but I also had a lot of questions because if there's one thing I'm grateful for, they did radicalize me to be a Jesus follower. Like that part still holds true. That's why I'm doing the work today. They convinced me that following Jesus is the best way for me to live my life. And I said, okay, I'm in. I will sign the card, and my yes will be my yes. I'm not going to ever change that, right? So when I started seeing just things that I couldn't reconcile, like, and I was 18, right? Didn't know much of anything. And then I'm like, why are we always so mad at gay people again? Like, I I don't
Right.
understand like the hate I'm seeing from people that are claiming to be Jesus people. And at the time, I wasn't affirming. I was very conservative still. It was my theological paradigm. But even I started seeing like things aren't fully adding up, right? They're not making sense. So I think there's a lot of those moments. And then I think when Trump came on the scene, that was the biggest moment of like, wait, guys, wait, let me get this straight. You wanted me to save myself for marriage, right? Sexual purity was like the highest ideal. If I was caught in a room with my girlfriend doing nothing, I could be disqualified from the worship team,
Right.
right? And now you're telling me that even though God probably couldn't use me if I was found in sexual sin, that I gotta vote for the guy who's like bragging about grabbing women and on the cover of Playboy, and that's somehow consistent? Like,
And he was somehow God's chosen.
no, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. April. I'm like, wait, and this guy's being used by God, and I couldn't drum in your auditorium in front of 40 people? Like,
Right.
it doesn't add up. So I think that all those moments, the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID, they all
Right.
just I got to a point where I thought something, I don't know what, but something is really wrong. And then that's when it all kind of unraveled from there.
Yeah, that makes sense because as a definite closeted 18 gay person, because I was at the time, I never understood it from church either. Like anytime I asked like what's wrong with this, like I never got like a good answer. It was just like it's sin, and I'm like, okay, what's sin?
Right.
And then it's like anything that takes you away from God, and I'm like, so does that mean sex all the way around takes you from God? Oh, if it's before marriage. Okay, so like what's different post-marriage? Oh, you signed some covenant. I'm like, okay, well, divorce rates are really high. And so like, again, like now, before his prefrontal cortex developed, I just went with it, right? And then post, it's like, I was a fucking idiot. Like, that's what I really think now. It's like, I couldn't get it.
Well, and when you interrogate some of these claims, like I still ask people today, I'll say, okay, you tell me when does having sex go from from sinful to not sinful?
Right.
At what moment in the ceremony
Yes.
does the magic happen where, well,
Right.
if you had sex before I said this, sin.
Right.
But now that I
Right.
said this, not sin. Like
Right.
where is, and then like where? And then other cultures define marriage very differently.
Yeah.
So like once you interrogate some of these claims and you really ask people to give you the specifics, most really can't, right?
Right.
And so I think once you do that, you start realizing like, wait, things are not adding up. And I'm supposed to believe, if I may, one more ranty
Oh,
part that
please
just
do.
drives me
Please do.
fucking bonkers.
Yes.
Is when I have these people, and again, they're taught this, and they're like, hey, Adam and Eve, first two people to ever exist. I'm like, well, if that's the case, and we all descended from Adam and Eve, and God's design is one man, one woman for life in marriage, you realize like that God set things up from the beginning that ideal could never be realized. Right? Because people are starting to sleep with their kids. It gets real weird and wacky really quick.
Yes.
So like, once you start thinking about these things logically, the math doesn't math.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating.
Do you think, because I felt like this, I felt like there was such a concentrated effort whenever I was in evangelical culture to get me when I was really young to buy into all of these things. Because like they weren't pursuing people my age whenever I was growing up in this, right? They were like wanting the people whose brains weren't developed at the 20s, and they're like, think this way, be pure. And it felt so honest, but it was always, but then you would find out scandal after scandal after scandal years later, and it is something interesting about how they just skew towards younger developed people, and I don't know if you guys have spent any time thinking about that.
Well, it's easier to indoctrinate a child
Yeah.
than it is a full grown adult who already has their beliefs and ideas about certain things. And it's another reason to not talking about abuse here, but just like bringing people into this movement.
Right.
It's why there's such a war on education right now, on public education. And
Right.
and if they are sending their children to public schools, they're telling them at church and in youth group, like you are the weapons that we're sending into the school. Like you are the one going to save, Satan's playground, I've heard is what they call public schools. And I refer to that too. So, and there's these radicalized little kids because they just are repeating what their parents and their pastors are saying, going in, telling all of their friends, like, you need to come to my youth group or you're going to go to hell. And they're like, oh, well, what's hell? And then you tell them. And then when you're a kid, that's a perfect reason to get all in. And then you suck people in that way. And then it's projection too. They talk about the
absolutely.
left or progressive people indoctrinating children.
Right.
They're the ones doing that.
Well, and I was one of the people doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
same.
I mean, I worked
Me
for
too.
an organization called Child Evangelism Fellowship. One of like the biggest like orgs to like, reach boys and girls with the gospel. I was 15, 16 doing their curriculum. I mean, the whole thing. And also I was, the evangelical subculture has a world that's like ready to inhale people who want to be punk rock, but with like real fundamentalist messaging. So like I was 15 years old skateboarding around town with a shirt. And I swear to God, the shirt said this. It was in all caps. I mean, you cannot miss it from 5 blocks. It just said abortion is homicide. And on the back, it had 3 statements. It said, you will not silence my message. You will not mock my God. You will stop killing my generation. And there was this group called Rock for Life. It was like a real edgy punk rock kind of evangelical thing. But there I am thinking like, yes, like this is what I'm called to do as this Christian in God's army, to like just wear this shirt and skateboard around town to prove that I'm different. So yes, I mean, there is, I think, a concerted effort because, to your point, I mean, I have a 2-year-old in the back, and when I tell him that, the green is green, he doesn't ever question it, Like, he can point at this, I'll say cup, he goes, cup, and that's the end of it. So when you're 5 or 6 or 7 and you're sat down and told, like, hey, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to go to a really bad place, or you're going to go to hell, of course you believe that because you trust the adults in your life as authority figures inherently to shape the world around you.
Yeah, because I mean, the first time they were like telling me about hell is I'm 5 years old, and I sleep with the nightlight on for like the next 3 years because my brain couldn't get it right. So like, there's this devil, it's coming for me. I need to be good. At 5 years old, what does good even mean? Like, and so in my mind, it's like I can't do anything basically, and so everything I thought was bad. And then the flip side is like it messes with you psychologically because there's this pressure on you, right? Of like, well, if you didn't talk to that person at that restaurant, that could be their eternal salvation on your shoulders. And so there's the other side of it too, whenever you're like in it, where you feel this pressure and you run yourself to exhaustion and you have no energy left. And I spent most of my college years doing this shit, right? And like, so like struggling through school because I'm just dead whenever I should just be sleeping, and instead I'm like having late night conversations with people trying to evangelize to them, and the pressure that brings. And I think, to your point, where that just got to a point of escalation was all the meanwhile, I couldn't change the fact of who I was attracted to. And so then they did the celibate thing, right? So it's like, oh, Logan, you can be gay, but you must be celibate. Yeah. And shout out to all asexual people out there who have that ability in there, but that is not who I am.
Props to you.
At all. And so, like, I totally give them mad kudos for that. But, like...
That is a spiritual gift that I do not have.
Right,
so.
right. I don't have it either. So, isn't it interesting in all of this that... And this kind of leads into... You posted a really interesting story, I think it was last Sunday or something, when you went to... Was it Andy Stanley's church? This kind of leads me there of, like... You were talking about, like, what you thought a new church culture could be. And I'm curious more of what you think about that, knowing all of these connotations that comes with a lot of the white evangelical culture. Like, how do you think we move forward as spaces?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I probably have some views that are not the most popular in progressive spaces, but whatever. It is what it is. I did not grow up in, like, the progressive mainline space or progressive churches, so deconstructing and, like, getting kicked out of my church for just having these views was like really a new thing for me, right? And so as TNE started growing and I was getting more networked with different people in more mainline spaces and just like not the space that I was used to, I kind of realized I'm like, listen, and I don't want to first off, let me just be clear, like liturgy and like history is beautiful and really good. My brain was just not formed around those things for church. So I got to a point where I was like, this is a little dry, guys. Like, I love the messaging, but like the methods are just what is going on here, right? And so I don't like mega church culture for a myriad of reasons. Like, we can all the things, okay? Like the hierarchies, like the leadership structures, the money. I'm none of what I'm going to say is an endorsement of those really unhealthy things, okay? Right. But one thing that evangelicalism has done really well is that they really present really well, like in a modern way, right? And that's why they're so damaging, because they look so progressive. They feel so cutting edge. you guys have drums at your church. It feels like I'm at like a concert, and like the pastor's cool and hip and talks my language, and he's really relatable. And then you find out like, well, but if you're queer, like you're not welcome here, right? And like their theology is actually super fundamentalist. But then I started engaging in like progressive spaces that were like super traditional, with how they manifested, but really progressive with theology. And so I'm at like Andy's church, and I'm like watching this band do their thing, and I'm like simultaneously like reminiscing about how much I loved doing that on stage and how great it was. And I was thinking, like, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a world for people who wanted this? No one has to assimilate into this idea, but for those who might want this, where you're in a high production environment and you're singing songs about God's unconditional love, and we actually fucking mean it.
Yeah.
Like every person's, you know, we don't have any qualifications on that. And so I was just talking about in this like story series, I was kind of just decompressing those thoughts of like, it would be really nice to be able to find a church that cared about like that presentation, but really had a progressive, inclusive theology wrapped up in that, where the leadership and how it was structured represented all the values that we all want, but also like I was excited and I was energized. I'm like, wow, like I feel something again, you know, from the spaces that I grew up in. So again, these are just out loud thoughts. Like there's no plan for TNE to become a mega church or anything.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like things that I think about sometimes. I'm just kind of ideating like what could be, could be a better future that like feels really powerful and it feels like I'm part of something bigger than myself. And I say all this knowing that people in the room here probably have a lot of feelings on all of these things and the manipulation of music, and I understand all of that. I think where I'm at in my journey is that I'm human. I recognize music is emotional and manipulative inherently anywhere. I miss that feeling. I think I kind of want it again. And I would love to have that feeling knowing that the words mean everyone and they're not conditional.
Yeah, well, and I was interested in this, and I really wasn't going to go here, but based on your answer, I'm just going to. You know, it's interesting, in an event that just happened last Tuesday that's left us all a little traumatized. One of the really, like, breakdowns that people are thinking about is 8 of the top 20 podcasts are one-way leaning, and the other side has 2 of the top 20. So to your point, what's kind of fascinating to me is it's obvious that like the way spaces and the way people get information is changing and developing, and like a lot of what you all are doing is how a lot of people get their news. And that's the tricky part, and why I wanted to ask you about that story is like maybe there is something, I don't know. I'm terrified of it, just so you know. Like I'm terrified to be sitting here right now. Like in the back of my mind, every time I drive to this space, I'm like, they're gonna kick me out today. But in this moment, I am wondering what it means, because right now information is getting out in a much more clear and tactical way, one side versus the other.
I mean, I don't want to get ranty about this, but this is what I've been doing for the past year, talking to you about this and other people. Are we live streaming? Is this public?
It is live streaming.
Well, I might get in trouble, but again, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I was involved with the Harris Waltz Faith Cabinet. They met every Tuesday about how to engage faith voters from a digital media perspective, and I learned a lot. And they're all, I mean, they're great people. Like, people on the call are like, they get it. They want to do the best work that they can. And there were just moments where I was quite flabbergasted at how little they understood about social media or YouTube or how to go live or what it means to gain an audience. Right. And I've been kind of beating this drum now for 2 years with people behind the scenes where it's like, I don't think you all understand how effective right-wing media is.
It's very
like
effective.
This is just, I'm being pragmatic now. Okay, I'm just shifting into a mode. I'm giving you just brass tacks data that we've pulled, that we've tried to campaign on, to give you all perspective of what you're looking at, like just the media landscape. Okay, you have 4 major right-wing organizations. You have Turning Point USA, Daily Wire. Names. Turning Point USA is Charlie Kirk. They do about $80 million a year in funding. They're humongous. You have Daily Wire. That's where like your Matt Walsh's. I know this is like so sacrilegious to say here, but you know your Ben Shapiro's. They're there. You have PragerU, and you have The Blaze. That's where the woman who wrote Toxic Empathy, Ali Stuckey, she's under the Blaze Network. Those 4 organizations did $315 million last year in funding. All of their brand accounts alone have about 35 million followers. Just their brand accounts. That's not including the personalities. There is nothing like that in even moderate spaces, let alone leftist spaces, because we all know that Democrat and leftist is very different, right?
They're
I'm sure
very
many of us
different.
were like, hey, I'm going to pull the lever for Harris, but like, can we stop bombing children, please?
Right.
And I was at the
Right.
DNC. I was at the DNC, and I'm watching them put military generals on stage, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, this is, is this like a neocon, like Bush era thing? Why is Dick Cheney endorsing Harris? So
Right.
I know the difference,
Correct.
right? I get all of that. I'm with you.
I feel you
Right,
so
okay.
deeply about that.
Solidarity. And I don't think that people who are, I'm just using words sound like it is what it is, the establishment type Democrat people who mean well, your mainline progressive establishment types who mean well, they think that going on MSNBC is like a big deal. And that's great, but it really is not a big deal. Like, does anyone here even watch those shows live? I see Rachel Maddow when she goes viral on TikTok. I never watch her show on MSNBC, right? Because you're right, how we consume content has totally shifted.
It's totally changed.
And so when Joe Rogan has Trump on, and that does 46 million views, and Harris goes on Call Her Daddy, and that does 1 million views, come on, right? So
That says a lot
it's
about
a major issue, and we need to start thinking about how do we use the tools of empire to dismantle empire? Because you're never going to do it with a reach of 100 people or 40 people or 1,000 people. You got to think bigger. You just have to.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially because even though we would all prefer not to be, we are in a capitalistic society, and that's going to make a lot of decisions. Speaking of something that's crappy, though, and dehumanizing, so this is for April. First of all, I just want to say I'm sorry for what happened on Twitter, and I literally wore Pokemon Crocs on purpose because of what you wrote in your book, because I hate that Pokemon got robbed from you, and as someone who also had Pokemon almost get robbed from me, but my parents, like, stuck it out and said, no, they're not demons in your pockets. It's just a cartoon so that my kid can behave for 30 minutes. So, like, you all just got to stop. So that was my view. How are you and your family doing post being, like, horrifically attacked on a major social media platform? And how are you doing with all of that?
Sure. Well, if you don't know, last weekend I went viral on Twitter, which I don't recommend, which is now known as X, but I will dead name that forever.
Yeah.
So I literally I made a post. It was very simple. It was my picture with the I voted sticker, like we all did because I voted early. And I just said, I am a Christian mom and wife who is sick of seeing my faith weaponized as a tool of hatred and oppression, and that Christian nationalism is a danger or is a perversion of both the faith and the Constitution. So I voted for Kamala. Put it out there. It started getting some traction. AOC retweeted it.
Wow. I did not know that.
It went mega viral.
Right,
It
really
wasn't just
viral.
Wow.
Like it got up to like 171,000. Like by far my most viral tweet ever.
Wow.
Ever. Like not even close. But after she retweeted it, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And it was like, great. And then it went down because then all the really large right-wing accounts started quote tweeting it and dug up pictures of my family, which I had been very intentional about pretty much taking most of the stuff with my kids offline. I had one picture that was my cover photo on my personal Facebook page that this dude found somehow. He blurred out their faces, thank God, or I would have been like livid. But I started getting death threats. One guy threatened to kill my kids. And it was just a constant barrage of hate, nonstop. And it was terrifying, honestly. And like I was talking to Beecher, my spouse, because the main thing that they were bringing out is that I was married to a trans activist. And if you know Beecher, they're many things, but they're not really a trans activist. They're trans, but they just kind of exist, you know?
Right. Like they were cooking for us this weekend.
Right.
And, like hanging out. And
they're
that's
the
about
calmest activists. Like if they were an activist, they're failing at the activism.
World's
part.
worst activist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you in that, like, because, you know, a lot of these people would claim to follow God, Jesus, and they lost their shit because you stated an opinion.
Yeah.
And how does that make you feel about, like, does that affect anything of your future thoughts about church and how church communities can work?
It really pissed me off.
Yeah.
Like at first I was very scared, and I did start bawling at one point because I was like, am I putting my kids in danger? Like, is what I'm doing harming my actual family?
Wow.
But I like Beecher looked at me and was like, no, you are doing the right thing.
Wow.
And so Beecher's like, you should make a video about this. You have a following. Get people to come over there and help you. And Beecher, I was like, should I delete it? She's like, do not delete it. And I didn't want to because I stood by everything that I said.
Right.
And so I made this video. Tim came to my rescue too. Tim was going hard.
The white man to the rescue.
I know.
Wild at heart, brave heart.
I know. And then another one of my good friends, Eve was framed, who's an atheist. She was in there using more scripture than I've ever seen like anyone use, and she was like, "You don't know how to use your Bible." And I was like, "I love this little community."
Yeah.
And I just kept hearing like that phrase. I don't remember who said it, but it was like, use your voice even if it shakes. And I just felt like I'm not going to back down for what I know beyond a shadow of a doubt is the right thing to do, which is to stand up to hate and to stand up to bullies. And I'm not going to back down from that.
Yeah.
Yes, it was terrifying, and it really, really sucked to know Tuesday and Wednesday that those bullies won this time. But I still believe that love conquers all, and I'm not going to let hate shut me up.
Nice. I'm really sorry that happened to you. I'm really sorry. I deleted Twitter several years ago because of Trump. I won't lie about it. Like when all I saw every day was retweets of what he was saying, I'm like, I'm collapsing emotionally. I can't do this anymore. So I admire people like yourself who go in there and speak that truth in there. And I'm really, really, really sorry that happened. But that brings us to Christian nationalism, which we all know is not a fun conversation. You wrote a great book about it. By the way, just shameless plug, she will have a copy of those books. If you all don't have a copy of Star Spangled Jesus, they'll be out after this talk. So with Christian nationalism and right-wing media being as powerful as it is, it's pushing a lot of Christian nationalism. Like, how do progressive communities work? How do they move forward? I don't even call this a church, partially for my own psyche, but I call it like a social experiment where I love being with these people so much because they're just some of my favorite people, but I can't really view it as a church. So how do you all think that this will keep moving forward? Because you guys are doing the podcast sphere, right? So how does church work with how strong Christian nationalism is, and how do we not get hijacked by Christian nationalism?
Well, one thing in this election that we haven't talked about is that not only are right-wing people outperforming media-wise and podcasts and stuff, not traditional media, but just the internet. Every single Sunday in white evangelical churches across the nation, week after week, people are hearing a Christian nationalist message.
Yeah.
There are pastors getting up saying to vote biblical values and then saying, kick immigrants out.
Right.
They don't belong here. And then saying, they talk about abortion, they talk about being anti-women, anti-immigrants, pro-biblical marriage. They spout all these things that Jesus either did not say a word on or said the exact opposite.
Right.
But I think you have a lot of cultural Christians who are not actually reading the red letters. They are hearing what a pastor says, or they're not even going to church. They've become products of Fox News.
Right.
And I think for me personally, how a progressive church can move forward, like, I don't know that the church, like, we need an institution.
Right.
But what we need to do is to counteract that misinformation. And I think for a lot of us, to me, it's like how I changed was realizing when I was causing harm. Because I think a lot of people who are Christian nationalists, whether they realize it or not, think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
They think they're being good people. They think they're following the teachings of Jesus. It doesn't make sense. But they believe that. And if you can gently show them, one, read this verse from Jesus. Over a little bit after a while, it gets in there. And if once you convince them that they've caused harm, that's when they'll change.
Yeah.
If they want to be good people, and I think a lot of them do want to be good people, we have to show them how what they're doing is actually harming people, and then that's when you can have that breakthrough.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say in that I was one of those people causing people harm because I held on to it for so long, and you don't realize it, right? And then slowly over time, it was really when I turned 26, it's like my brain sort of clicked on, and I was like, wait, this doesn't make sense. I've been saying these things for years. I tried to pray the gay away more than the gay could be prayed away, in all honesty. Like, I really tried. Like, those countless nights in the bathroom just crying, like, not wanting to feel the way I feel and not being able to talk about it. And it slowly clicked for me, but what's interesting is it's not a lot of people's stories, right? Like, a lot of people stay the course. They listen to what people say, and it is interesting how strong, literally probably going back at least to Billy Graham, that how much influence this has had in society. And I don't know if that's just where people grow up, factors of education. There's probably so many things, and I just am interested because I'm probably lean skeptical, right? Like, I'm probably like the wrong person to even be doing this interview in all sincerity, because I'm not sure church can work. I'm not sure. And I work in a church, but I'm not sure it can work.
Well, I mean, church definitely works. Works for the black church.
Yeah.
You know, we gotta think about, like, what do we mean by church? If we're just talking about like white progressive mainline spaces, then yeah, it's failing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just reality. Like, the church is dying in that sense, but that's just one way of expressing church, you know? I think a lot about the black church and just like their resilience for so long and their deep roots to liberation and also non-dehumanization as well, and people that have really spoken up throughout, you know, that legacy of what's been going on. And so there's much for us to learn from, I think, when it comes to that, because it kind of expands the reality that the church and really Christianity is so much bigger. You know, I mean, I think like anything, right, we can use church or the Bible as a tool for liberation or as a weapon of oppression. And if you need examples of that, look at how the black church talks about Scripture and God and the Bible and church compared to how Christian nationalism talks about you know, the Bible and Scripture and church. Or read a Bob Jones sermon of how he used the Bible to justify why the races were to stay separate. And while MLK is like, no, because I'm a Christian, right, we need integration. Like, this is unbiblical. He might use that phrase. You know, it's unjust. So this is not, you know, I think one of the fatal flaws in evangelicalism is that you're just kind of taught that you're always on the right side of things. Like, Christianity, however that's defined, is always right and true. And then you start kind of reading, like, even just broad American history of like how the church has acted. Like, actually, the white church in particular has been on the wrong side often on all these issues.
Almost always.
Almost always, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And I think the other thing too is, I'm sure many people know that there's been like this explosion of this term deconstruction and people like rethinking their faith and moving. So, but what are we inviting people to? Right? Obviously, deconstruction is really good at helping you create a vacuum, which is good. You have to be able to deconstruct that stuff and really interrogate why you believe what you believe and kind of get outside that basement and get to that first atrium where you're like, holy shit, I thought there was like a desert up here. Turns out there's a huge house I'm still a part of, right? But that vacuum needs to be filled. And so, like, what are other church expressions doing to welcome those people? I think the other thing, just pragmatically, we have to just acknowledge, whether we like it or not, white evangelical spaces, they focus so much on communication. They have great communicators. They say horrible things, but they're really effective communicators. The way that they present and they talk, and like the 3-point sermon, and like the, you know, like the funny comedy story in the beginning, and then tying it back to God. You know, that stuff, there's a formula to that, and it's really effective. So I think that there's a lot for us to think about, and also just to be honest about, right? Because yes, certainly a lot of the theology is toxic, but frankly, thinking about how I grew up, that was a third space for me. I met friends as someone who was 5, 10, 15 years old that formed a lot of who I am today still, right? And that evangelical space gave me that place to meet those people. So I think we have to learn from that and think about what are we inviting people into that kind of helps them think more critically about being the most radical Jesus follower that you can be. Because if you start using that language, I'm all about Jesus, great. Let's take his words seriously. I think that's some of the stuff that we think about.
Yeah, and just piggybacking off that, how do you think other religions, even atheism, how do you think they fit into the larger, even Christian conversation? Because I think there's a lot to gain from other religions that Christians haven't adopted, and we know that because at least in even Eastern Christianity is pretty different from what we would consider over here. They have a lot more mindfulness practice in the way that they do things. So do you think there's any space for other thoughts that can benefit Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question because I think every religious identity is going to have, at least theologically, their own like exclusivity claims, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty normal. That's why they're different religions. It's not the same things. They have different ways of viewing the world and God and all that stuff. There's a difference though between being a fundamentalist and saying, well, what I believe is the objectively true reality about God and how it all works, versus saying we have these convictions, and I think like I'm pretty convinced of this might be how it works, but I recognize that it's kind of a crapshoot still, and that maybe we can approach with curiosity and see how our Muslim, siblings and our Hindu siblings think about the same questions that we're wrestling through.
Right.
Like one of my friends, Qasim Rashid, he's a human rights lawyer. He's a Muslim, and we talk often about the similarities in our faiths and like the commands that we both have, and also our differences. At the same time, I really believe that in this current moment, in particular, the white church needs to own their shit and like handle it. Like we shouldn't be relying on black women or our queer neighbors to handle the mess that white church has made. We need like able-bodied cis people to handle that, because it shouldn't be on anyone in this room who is like freaking out about Trump to go online and start talking about like why they deserve to live, right? That should not be on them. That's not you shouldn't have to do that, right? You should have people who are advocating for you who can take those arrows because of how I move through the world. Like there's an inherent privilege to this body I walk through, right? We all know this. Like it's not rocket science. I'm 6'4". The machine was built for me. I talk like a bro, right? It's just like it's designed for me. So how do people like me use that privilege, right, for the sake of my neighbors? So I think we have to think about that too. Like we have to own this and say, we messed up, we'll clean it up. And also along the way, could definitely use your advice on how you might handle some of these questions, that's important.
Yeah.
I also just think in general where I am now, I'm much more about shared values over shared beliefs. And I think so many of us, regardless of where we land on Jesus or God or religion or whatever, like we're fighting fascism.
Yes.
Like I think we need everybody. I'm not going to exclude anyone. If you want to fight for queer rights, come on in. Like wherever, whatever you believe.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to Trump.
Who?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he literally twice, 3 times really, has run a full campaign on completely demonizing language. Like it's really past the point of dehumanization. Like he's literally made it an us versus them scenario, and that's really hard to deal with. So probably most of us are dreading probably some of us know or have family who voted for Trump. How do we move forward? Because I don't know.
You want me to go or you want to go?
You go first if you want.
Oh,
If you want, you're allowed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. First off, it just depends on who you are. All right, it's going to be different for different people. Let's just start with that.
Yep.
I mean, everyone is kind of trying to put the pieces together because this wasn't a close election at all.
Right.
Wasn't even close.
He did win the popular vote.
Yeah, they won. Yeah, first time since 2004. A Republican won the popular vote. They flipped the Senate, might flip the House, the Supreme Court. Like I know we know that, but I like saying the quiet parts out loud just so we all are on the same page that this is a really like red alert moment.
Yes.
And also people are trying to figure out how 71 million people like pull the lever, right? And there's all kinds of ideas how and why and all that stuff. Yeah, when it comes to Trump and the work that we do a lot, one of the problems of being in this work is that you are in a bubble and you're talking to scholars all day and you're kind of tracking like names that really no one in the general population knows about. Like, I'm not even sure if in this room people know names like Joel Webbin or Doug Wilson. These are people who, like, if you know, you're freaking terrified. If you don't know, you're like, who's that? And most people in America just don't know the people behind a Trump administration, right? They hear Trump say, maybe we get rid of the income tax. Like, well, my grocery bills still are high, which is true. Okay, yes, inflation is lowered, but corporations didn't lower their prices, right? And so, like, you think about those things. As far as the witness of the church, and as far as family stuff, I just think it gets really murky because, I have parents. You can guess maybe how they did or didn't vote. And they're complicated people because, like, they love my kids really well,
Right.
like they want a relationship and like they want to
Right.
get along. They don't want to talk about politics. And I'm like, okay, for me, and again, this is so custom to every person's situation. So don't take what I'm about to say as a prescription for how you do it with your family dynamic because there's so many factors that I could never understand that go into yours. For me and my partner decided we have to make a choice. Do we either save the relationship and try and love them as well as possible and say, look, we can make room for you. Can you make room for us? And maybe kind of show them that it's possible to, think about things differently that way. Or do I just kind of tell them the reality and say, fuck off and you're dead to me? And will that ever potentially change their mind? For us, the answer was that's not a real option. Like my parents would never be open to any kind of change at all if we went that route.
Right.
And also our kids love them and they love my kids really well and my brother and his wife, like we get along really well. So we chose the relationship option because it worked for us. I get a lot of DMs from people who that does not work for them. They have parents who do not respect boundaries. My parents do respect our boundaries around faith and around politics. But I know many people, maybe in some of this room, whose parents have no such respect for said boundary, right? And if you are someone who is queer, for example, right, the level just goes up. So I'm all about saying you have autonomy to decide how you want to move forward with that relationship. Like you are an adult, you have that right to do. For us, and I'm kind of this way always anyway, almost to a fault, I always try and save relationship in hopes that I can crack the door open and then use that as the wedge to say, look, I do care about you. I'm willing to have the conversation. Can we find a better path forward because we're on the same planet together? That's kind of how I've approached it in my personal life.
I would say something similar. And just to give some hope, we stayed in contact, obviously, with all of our family members, many of whom voted for Trump both times. And some extended family have said, we don't want anything to do with you. That was their decision.
Right.
But it's wild to me how much Trump won because I know so many people who did not vote for Trump again this time around, who changed. Like people that I know who have voted Republican every single time in their 60-odd years of life and voted blue for the first time ever this year. And so I do see glimmers of hope, and I know it is terrifying. I don't want to downplay the gravity of the situation of what 4 years of Trump will do, but I do think there are people who can and will be changing over the next 4 years. I think we're going to see a huge wave, another wave of deconstruction when you start seeing people that are in white evangelical churches right now who are just now somehow questioning something doesn't feel right here. And I think we can just be a soft landing for when people do change. And I know not everyone can do this.
Yeah.
I think especially if you're a white cis het person who has that kind of privilege to still be in those spaces. Like for me personally, I want to be able, when people change, I don't want to be like, we told you so, look how much harm you did. We want to say, hey, I was where you were too. I get it. And it really sucks to learn that you were the bad guy. but there is room for you over here,
Yeah.
and we're going to learn together and be better.
Yeah, I mean, what changed me was story. I
It's
mean,
true.
I was being called a bigoted asshole online by some random person on Facebook did not persuade me to change my views. The person who really started changing my views was the first gay person I met working at Starbucks. His name is Joey. I can tell this story publicly. I've asked permission, so we're clear about that. But honestly, I was 18, and I'm working in my first, secular job, and like here's this gay guy, and I'm like, the gays.
We're
I've been
terrifying
warned. I've
over
been
here,
so
aren't we?
warned about it. And then he was also an atheist, so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna faint. Like, can this guy do any more totally depraved? You're filling in the blanks of what you were taught. And we started talking, and it turns out like he loves his neighborhood. He's super active in his neighborhood. He likes heavy music. He likes Rob Zombie. I'm like, wait, this is like not fitting the mold of what I was taught a gay person is. And after Starbucks, we kept in touch on Facebook, and honestly, we would go back and forth in the comments all the time. But he would just ask questions. Yep. Hey, Tim, if Rush Limbaugh, who I grew up listening to, because that was the world I inhabited, if Rush Limbaugh always talks about freedom, for Americans, why don't I have the freedom to get married? I was like, well, that is a good point. I'm like, well, the Bible. And he's like, well, I hear you, but, maybe I don't believe the Bible like you do. So why should that belief affect me? I'm like, another good point,
Yeah.
So like, I'm just saying it was those moments. And so
Yeah.
to April's point, and again, it's a big world. My posture as a Jesus follower, I'm going to put it under the Jesus follower tent, is to always try and have a both and approach of politically, socially, culturally, I'm going to fight you every step of the way. Like I'm going to resist your policies all the way. And I will still get lunch with you, and I will still get to know your name. I will hopefully relationally build something with you and invite you to repent and to think about the option of a better way forward that helps you turn and go the other way, right? Because if we're all on the same planet with these people and we don't believe in violence and we don't believe in killing people, which should be like, of course, because we don't storm Capitol buildings, right? That's the theory. Then if they're here, we have to make something happen. And so how do we get the change that we want? And yes, of course, organizing and resisting and protesting are all needed. But relationally, we have to have a posture of like, dude, like, what are you doing? Think about this. We've been friends. I can push you on this, right? What would it look like if we loved our enemies well? Hey, you know that we have people in society who are trans, who are terrified because look at the rhetoric. And if you can build that relationship, you build the trust. Trust is how you change minds, not data. So you have to build the trust first and then start kind of hoping to shift in that perspective, in that trajectory.
Yeah, and so you guys kind of alluded to this. So do you have any hope at all? Hope not being an emotion, hope being something we're going to have to get our brains around and get to, of this not being a MAGA country, basically. Because right now it...
You mean like legally, socially, culturally, like in what way?
So, that's a good question for me. More in the sense of, will we move past just as a society the way 71 million people voted this time for things? Do you actually think that as a society we'll swing into more of a different way of thinking than a lot of the stuff Trump's saying, right? Because you think about it, there are big moments in American history that have kind of left staples, and they've left ripple effects for a long time. Do you think this is something that's going to have staying power? Do you think it's something that will filter off?
Well, I don't know the answer.
Right, yeah, of course.
I do think there's going to be damage that's going to have very long effects. But I have hope. And we've seen fascist regimes in history if it gets to that extreme.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I've been thinking obviously a lot about Germany in the 1930s.
Really?
Yeah, really surprising.
So random.
Something that, and we were talking about this, Beecher was talking to me about it too, made a video about it. But when I was growing up and in evangelical spaces and in youth group, they taught a lot about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and how like he was the church, you know, like he followed Jesus and he, you know, resisted Hitler and all that stuff. I was never taught that the Church of Germany as a whole, the evangelical church, overwhelmingly supported Hitler, championing him.
Yeah, we were not taught that.
And right, but that's actually factually true. And at least I know now the answer of like, could I have seen Hitler coming? And, you know, there's something really powerful about being on the right side of history. I do believe that there's more people, good people in this world than there are MAGA. The MAGA extremists are not the 71 million.
Right, correct.
One of the main
Correct.
Google searches on Tuesday was, did Joe Biden drop out? So people just don't pay attention.
That's true.
And like, I do think, we're gonna, I do believe, I still believe love's going to win.
Yeah.
I think
No,
we have
that's
we
great.
have an uphill battle, but I am personally more, like we were talking about, don't let this paralyze you, let this radicalize you. And like the time to be loud was yesterday. And so like, obviously grieve,
Yeah.
do what you need to do. But for me personally, like, I'm not taking this sitting down.
Hell no. Yeah, motivated
Even
like
though
hell.
I'm sitting down now. So
Stand up, April. Start preaching.
I know.
Metaphorically,
yeah, I was gonna say,
metaphorically,
I felt a
yeah.
little weird
Metaphorically,
sitting when you were
I am
talking.
Standing so tall right now. Yeah, I mean, you know, history. You know, like this is not the first time we've seen movements like this. And by the way, globally, this is happening. Like there's something
so
happening
true.
globally.
That's true.
Look at Hungary. Look at Italy. There's like a rise of this. I think one of the things off the top of my head is I'm still trying to figure out how do we kind of get here, what's going on.
Yeah.
Is that, you know, Trump ran on a very populist kind of like platform of like, hey, these elitists are like keeping you down, and you know you can't afford groceries. And I think that we have to acknowledge that while Trump is full of propaganda and bullshit and lies all the time, like there's no doubt about that, and he dehumanizes people and he echoes sentiments that Hitler echoed, like that's all factually correct. He also was able to tap into something on the pulse that the Democratic Party completely did not see. And I will tell you, this is being in some of these spaces behind the scenes, I understand the sentiment of elitism in Democratic spaces. I've gotten hints where I'm like, you know, you do, this person does kind of have like they're looking down on those people in Iowa. You know, they think they're a bunch of old hicks who are just idiots. I'm like, I'm not sure that's really going to do it for you long term. And I do think that, you know, frankly, pragmatically running a moderate campaign, trying to think that, again, Dick Cheney endorsing you some kind of win is like, what? Like, because, again, right, to the right's point, I also do not want to be in endless wars. I do agree with that. Now, what they mean is very different, right? We know that. Like, we understand that it's different when Russia's invading Ukraine and, you know, how we should support, Ukraine. And also, we're signing the checks to Gaza. But also Biden was signing the checks to Gaza, you know, and Harris wouldn't put one Palestinian voice on the DNC stage. I sat with the uncommitted movement outside the arena watching their live conference protests. I'm sitting next to all these other, you know, like journalist types, you know, and I'm thinking, I'm like, why? What are we doing? Why is Adam Kinzinger out on the main stage, and why is this military general out on the main stage, but these people are not? So I think that we have to look at inwardly as well. We have to also be self-critical and think, yeah, whoever ran these campaigns, whatever data they had, was way off the mark. Way off the mark, right? Because, yeah, but listen, it's tough out in these streets for me. I live in New Jersey. It's a great state. It's expensive, but like, my grocery bill is still high, right? But I'm also a high-informed voter. Like, I know what Trump brings that people don't really know he brings. I don't think most people know about the term Project 2025 and what it means. They just don't, because most people are just trying to survive in a late-stage capitalistic nightmare where you can't afford housing, you're worried about a surprise health care bill, you don't know, most Americans don't have enough money to cover an emergency expense in their savings. And we've had Democratic and Republican majorities over the past couple decades. So something is wrong. And I think Trump really tapped into that. And people were like, this guy's right. Yeah, maybe he's kind of fucking crazy, but he's right. Can he really? Let's give him the old college try. So we have to think about it more than just. And I would agree, there are definitely misogyny, racism, all played a role. I know plenty of men who will never vote for a woman because women don't lead, okay? That's a huge problem for sure.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there are other things at play for a lot of Americans who don't think like that. They're just trying to survive. And so we have to just own it.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. It's totally. I consider myself a political junkie. I literally like absorb this stuff all day, every day. So I obviously share like most of what both of you said. My favorite moment of this is when Jon Stewart looked at Tim Wells and said, "The Dick Cheney thing."
Yeah, right.
Do we
Yes.
have to?
Yes, exactly.
Do we have to?
Exactly.
Like,
It's
because
like, dude, what are we doing?
Right. Exactly. And so that's an interesting. But there are some things that we can do despite a Trump presidency, and I think that's, I think a lot of us, I'll speak for myself primarily, as a gay person, I'm just totally in grief mode, right? And there will come a point when I'm ready to like move. I've got to process all of this. I've probably got to shout several fucks before I'm ready to go, but just processing all of this. But what, in your guys' opinion, is something that is really important moving forward? Because it does matter. The next right thing does matter that we do.
Can I speak extra salty?
Yeah.
Not wearing a blue bracelet. I'm sorry, like I don't know, get in the streets, like start protesting, donate to people, like get involved in your local politics, like get active. Especially, I feel like I have an obligation to yell at white people the most. Like, stop virtue signaling. Do not put ally in your Insta. That term is given, okay? Like you don't just like self-declare like ally. Like no, someone tells you that and you keep it to yourself, okay? Like, when you get invited to the barbecue, you made it, not when you say like, I'm an ally in BLM. That doesn't do it.
Right.
And so I just think there is like, I've learned in this space, there is like a progressive white like thing that I'm like, ugh, it feels a little gross to me. Like, are you decolonizing? Because you kind of feel a little privileged still, Like, you're still not thinking about, are you in solidarity with the marginalized by actually feeling the sting of oppression like James Cone talks about? That's where you put your money with your mouth is, not by saying ally on your Instagram bio.
Right.
So I think that, white people in particular who are like, how did we get here? Well, what did you do? Did you run for school board? Were you knocking on doors? Were you signing petitions? Like, were you donating to causes that you believe in? What were you doing? Right? And again, it's complicated. People have different economic statuses and work life. I understand all that.
Oh, yeah.
But I do think that we have a real opportunity here to realize, especially if you're a Christian. I'm going to speak evangelicalese for a second, because I used to say this all the time when I was a conservative. But, if you're a Christian, welcome to full-time ministry. The idea is like, back then I meant like, you don't have to get paid to be like, doing the work of the kingdom, so to speak, right? And if you're a Christian today, like, yes, I still believe that. You are called to follow the radical, the nonviolent way of Jesus. It's not about belief in Jesus. It's about allegiance to Jesus. Like, that's such a big distinction. So what does allegiance to Jesus look like in 2024 America, where the majority of the white evangelical church said, I think the guy who's found liable of sexually assaulting a woman and who lies and who tried to overthrow our election and lies about everything and calls immigrants poison, that's probably God's chosen candidate. Well, maybe we have some prophetic fire to kind of lob that way and be like, guys, what the fuck are you doing? I've read the Bible, like the Bible's clear. Welcome the foreigner, like checkmate, game over. Like we have to start talking like that to those people. Like, use their language and just reflect it back to them. So for me, for new evangelicals, so to speak, that's a huge focus for us next year, the year after, is like we have to kind of clap back at some of this stuff. We have to let our most marginalized neighbors know we stand in solidarity with them, not to appropriate them, not to make them like, look how good we're doing, not to tokenize them, but to learn from them and work with them to start creating the better path forward that we're all trying to find.
Yeah.
And then I would just say too, get aware, get knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Follow people online or organizations online that are doing the work, like Trevor Project for like queer people, like donate to places if you feel like you can't volunteer. Donate to places that are. If you can't donate, follow them, comment on their stuff, boost their stuff for the algorithm. Like there are little things you can do. And especially if you are a white person with privilege, be okay with speaking up when it's uncomfortable. Like be okay with being uncomfortable. Like for example, like my mother-in-law, I think she'd be okay with me sharing this. But
We're
she
gonna
like,
find out.
no, but she went to the dentist sometime recently, and her dental hygienist was just going off on trans people, and like, well, they're ruining our country, and they're this and they're that, and can you believe the surgeries in the school, and blah 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 blah, and to my mother-in-law's credit, she said, you know what? That's not actually true. My child is trans, and then told the whole story. And the woman literally started weeping, and she said, I'm so sorry. Like, people, I think a lot of them, they repeat talking points because that's what they are told. And if they are called out in a loving way, it's like, I find that offensive because that you're talking about my kid.
Yeah.
She changed in an instant. Now, I don't know if she's going to change her beliefs, but that moment's going to stick with her.
Right.
And so I think if you are in a situation, if you hear someone being racist, talking about immigrants, especially, this is why being aware and learning is important. And if you hear someone, if it's in the grocery store or whatever, and just like, hey, excuse me, actually, that's not true. Like, did you know that this is true? Or did you know, like, they're not actually eating dogs and cats? That was something Donald Trump just made up.
Right. Right.
Little things like that. And it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to suck in moments. But it's like those moments where speak even if your voice shakes.
Yeah. It's so great. Gosh, I could talk to you guys for another hour because I just want to pick your brains on all the things. But I'm going to end it with this last question. Why do you still do the Jesus thing?
Well, I love Jesus. I've had experiences in my life where Jesus was a really big comfort to me.
Mm.
And I think there's been no greater time than to follow the teachings of a brown immigrant refugee socialist.
Good answer.
I'm just compelled. I mean, the whole love your enemy thing. I've always been someone who roots for the underdog in my whole life. I've just been wired that way, and there's something very compelling about what does the underside have to teach us about what we can do better. And I think the way of Jesus, even the idea of resurrection, like, let's face it, I think at this point when you deconstruct, you're like, did it really happen? Did it not? I don't know. Regardless, the belief that resurrection happened is just like a beautiful, at minimum, metaphor for a hope that all things at one point will be made straight. The crooked will be made, not crooked anymore. I didn't want to say, I said straight, but I'm like, I didn't mean it like that. So,
I thought it was really funny.
I
thought it was really funny.
Read the room, Tim. Like, no. Did not mean like that. I just meant, the brokenness in the world.
That was really
made
good.
unbroken again, But yeah, so I think for me, following Jesus, it's just the way I want to live my life, long term. So.
And from a very practical standpoint, they're using Jesus. I'm going to frickin' use Jesus too. They can't take Jesus away from me.
Well said. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, April, everyone. Tim and April. Wow. So thank you all for being here today and for being part of this conversation and for staying here long. Just grace and peace to you as you grieve and as you process and as you figure out what your next right thing is. Bye.